I'm George Mason, host of Good God, Conversations That Matter, about faith and public life. I'm joined today by Rabbi Nancy Kasten, who'll be talking about her sense of call to ministry and her own personal faith journey. Welcome to Good God, Conversations That Matter, about faith and public life. I'm George Mason and grateful to welcome you to this program, and especially my friend Rabbi Nancy Kasten, who is here to join us in a conversation about her sense of her calling and ministry and how she sees her role in the community and in religious life in Dallas. Nancy, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Really glad to have you here. So these are things many people wouldn't automatically know, but we've known each other for nearly 30 years now, I guess, and they might believe that about me, but not you, right? You know, but we came to Dallas about the same time, and raised our families and all of that, and have known one another. My wife Kim and your husband David Stern, who is also a rabbi and the head rabbi at Temple Emmanuel here in Dallas. We've been friends for years, and increasingly over the years experienced great warm times together, and it's wonderful to be able to share in religious life and personal life in Dallas. But I think people would be really interested to know something about where you are from and how you came to your call as a rabbi. Women are increasingly called in Christian church tradition, but the same is probably true among Jews. It's not always been that way, has it?
No, it hasn't. I think the first woman rabbi was ordained in 1973.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
So I didn't grow up being exposed to women in the rabbinate,
right.
And was only introduced to that idea really after college.
Okay. And college was in New England?
Actually, that's when I started heading south of the Mason-Dixon line. I went to Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore.
Right. Okay, but grew up in Boston?
I did.
Right.
I grew up in Newton, Massachusetts.
Right.
And I always say, I probably said this to you before, that you can take the girl out of New England, but you can't take New England out of the girl. So I still have very strong roots there.
Well, yeah, I like to say that I live in Dallas, but my home is still in New York. You know, so New York is a similar thing, and your husband David is a New Yorker too, and we fight over which baseball team to cheer for, and he's a Yankees fan and I'm a Mets fan, and so those are just things that continue. They're always in us, but it also actually is a little bit challenging, isn't it, that there is a sense that when we are in Texas, we are interlopers a bit, that no matter how long we're here, we're not really Texans to some people. Isn't that a challenge?
Well, I mean, I think it goes both ways. I think in some ways I feel very welcome and part of the community here. And I think in many ways, Southerners are much more openly hospitable and welcoming.
Yeah, see, that's the dirty little secret that we Northerners don't like to admit, isn't it?
It's true.
You know,
it's
it
true.
really is. We balkanize in our neighborhoods pretty well, don't we?
I think that I've learned a lot by living here that really you can always find your niche if you are willing to maybe go outside of your comfort zone. And of course, I've been here almost 30 years and had 3 children and raised them, and and sort of have feet in those 2 places, as well as sort of my third foot in Israel a little bit too, as my homes of the heart. So
exactly, we'll talk about Israel a little more later, I hope, but. You're talking about figuring out what your niche is and that kind of thing. I imagine that being a clergy couple has been part of that challenge, especially because David has served a congregation and you have had a different ministry that you've had to find, as well as tending to family and those sorts of things. We never talk about how David's tending to family too, and I'm tending to family. There's still some latent gender issue about that, isn't there?
Maybe not so latent.
Yeah.
I think that
pretty obvious.
I think that as aware as I was of my own, ambition and the fact that David and I had exactly the same education, and coming out of the gate after rabbinical school had similar opportunities. You know, my desire to be engaged in family life in a meaningful way, and to be connected to my children in all the ways that they needed, just took me in a different direction. And they were all my choices, but looking back on it, they were very gender determined choices, for sure.
Yeah. So you have been a chaplain. You served as a chaplain at SMU, Jewish life, and that's a very interfaith, multi-faith, ecumenical sort of world. What was your ministry experience there through those years?
I think it was a fantastic experience. You know, I worked with Will Finnan, who was the chaplain to the university at the time. My immediate predecessor as the associate chaplain was Bob Cooper, you know, kind of a civil rights and human rights champion, still going strong. I taught spiritual wellness at SMU with Bill McIlvaney, another incredible,
the late Bill McIlvaney.
Yeah. So I was so fortunate to come to SMU. I started in 1990 and was there through 2002. And you know, we really worked hard to create an interfaith forum where different groups could be represented and help each other understand where we were coming from faith-wise. And it was a time when SMU was really trying to broaden its appeal to people of different faiths. It had been very much associated with the Methodist Church, and they really had a intention to be more ecumenical. They changed their name from officially and all their logos from Southern Methodist University to SMU. While I was there, and Ken Pye was the president of the university, really wanted to increase the numbers of Jewish students. So it was a very welcoming time for me on campus, and I got to know, one of my partners in work at the time was Eric Folkerth, and we continue to work together today, back together, and
pastor of North Haven United Methodist.
So, you know, just a great start. And a lot of the reason why we stayed in Dallas, David and I, because I had my start, you know, going back to your question about the gender roles, I started at SMU before we had kids, and I have a different name than David, and I had my own identity. And as we, you know, started having children, and I started pulling back a little more on my work, and my work changed, I realized that I had a standing in the community that was based on my work, independent from David, and that meant a lot. So,
how have well, I suppose that probably was one of the best ways for you to figure out how to negotiate the role of being a spouse of the head rabbi in a large congregation too, which carries with it all sorts of other expectations from people and whatnot. I know Kim, my wife, as you know, has had to figure out how to navigate those waters. Did having this other ministerial identity help strengthen your hand in that regard as well?
Well, that helped. I mean, there were a lot of things that helped. First of all, Temple Emmanuel, I mean, almost surprisingly, being in Dallas, was one of the first congregations to hire a woman rabbi. Shelley Zimmerman hired
Debbie Robbins, or
no, Ellen. I can't.
Oh, Ellen,
This is really embarrassing.
Oh, Ellen, forgive her.
Yes,
because
forgive
we're
me.
Over 50 now. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well over.
Okay. Well,
anyway, and then Liza Stern.
Yes.
And then Debbie Robbins.
And then Debbie. Okay.
And I came before Debbie.
Okay.
1 year before Debbie. I mean, David. David was ordained, and then I was ordained a year later, and then Debbie was ordained a year after that.
Okay.
So, so Temple Emmanuel has had a history of women in the pulpit from the very beginning, and that meant that they knew that there were clergy whose spouses were not going to be engaged in the same way. And in addition, even the senior rabbis at Temple Emmanuel, their wives always had their independent interests, and they didn't have a history of that strong Rebbitzin,
Yes.
Rabbi's wife,
Right.
Presence that many congregations have.
I think part of it in your congregation and
Lewis,
in ours.
Ellen Lewis.
Ellen Lewis, thank you. Got it. Okay, terrific. Because they're larger congregations, I think, and more urban, that more professional, I think people have been able to figure out how to let people have their own identities and their own roles.
But it was very unusual. I mean, because Dallas 30 years ago wasn't progressive, right?
Right.
I mean,
right.
And so in many ways, it was really far ahead of its time.
Wilshire actually started ordaining women to the ministry in about 1990 also, and people would be interested probably to know that one of our female staff members, ministers on our staff, Tiffany Wright and Debbie Robbins are great friends, and they actually have a women's clergy group that they started years ago to help nurture women clergy in the area and support them.
Right, and there are so many more now. I mean,
right. Well, it's exciting, and I think there's a tremendous gain for all of our congregations and our religious traditions when we realize that there's not a hierarchy of gender in creation that makes one closer to God than another, that the text of Genesis that talks about God created them male and female is on a par. I mean, there's an equality there, and that when we create those hierarchies, what we're doing is reflecting the brokenness of creation, not the original blessing of it, isn't it?
Yes, and I also think that we have prioritized certain tasks and certain roles and made them more valuable because they earn more money versus not earning money. The social capital versus monetary capital imbalance, and I think that has confused things some as well. So. I think that men and women are equally capable, both of the nurturing and home building aspects of a life, as well as the income generating and sustainable economic sustainability.
It's
of a
not
life.
really a compliment to our communities of faith when we say that we need more women to help us be more compassionate, and we need more men to keep us on task or some such thing, because actually we need more men to learn to be compassionate, and we need to recognize the initiative and creativity of women to do certain things. It's about learning that balance and not just, again, gender stereotyping values and qualities in those ways, right? So
absolutely
wonderful. Well, I think what I really like to do is pursue some conversation with you about your sense of call originally to ministry, and to find out what some of the language in your faith tradition is about that, and we'll talk about mine as well, and then something of the role of Israel in your life too. So let's take a pause here for a moment, and we'll hear about one of our partners who's doing good in the community.
The North Texas Food Bank is a local nonprofit focused on hunger relief. Right here in North Texas, there are more than 800,000 food insecure people. That means these folks don't always know when or from where their next healthy meal may come. Each day, the North Texas Food Bank Feeding Network provides access to more than 190,000 meals for hungry children, seniors, and families. While the food bank is making great strides to meet the need for food assistance, much work remains to be done to ensure that all hungry neighbors are fed. You can get involved and ensure that hungry kids are able to access the nutrition they need to thrive. Donate food. Healthy food items like peanut butter and canned tuna are always appreciated. Donate funds. Did you know when you donate $1, it provides access to 3 meals? Donate your time. Roll up your sleeves and come volunteer with the North Texas Food Bank. Donate your voice. Tell our elected officials that the issue of hunger matters. Visit ntfb.org to get involved. Good God with George Mason salutes the vital services provided to our community by the North Texas Food Bank.
Thank you. Thank you. Gracias.
Nancy, when we talk about call to ministry in our Christian tradition, well, there's many traditions of Christians, as you know, but sometimes we just use that language as if maybe we heard an audible voice, right? And it said, George, what I want you to do with your life is to be a minister. Sometimes we actually use even more challenging language, almost scary language about surrendering to the ministry. I've always wondered if that meant I had a gun to my head or if I was supposed to put my hands up, But there's something about the way we talk about call to ministry that is almost on the suggestion that you probably shouldn't ever want to do this, but maybe you'll give into it if you feel enough like God is making you somehow, or you can't do anything else. I've kind of rebelled against that a little bit through my life, where I've thought, if God sort of made me a certain way, maybe that was for a purpose, and this is the best way to fulfill that, and it's okay to volunteer for this if you enjoy it and like it. But what's your experience, and what kind of language did you grow up with, and how did you learn to discern your call to ministry?
Well, you just made me remember that when I first told my parents that I was going to become a rabbi, my mother asked me what kind of job that was for a nice Jewish girl.
There you go. Okay.
So, but in part, again, it was very new for
Yes.
women to become rabbis.
Sure.
And I think that, the word rabbi means teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And in Judaism, there's the calling comes to people like prophets, and prophecy ended a long time ago. We don't have prophets anymore. So
Well, maybe we can reinterpret that. Yeah.
So it's more about finding the what you were meant to do.
Yeah.
That
There you
piece of the puzzle that
Right.
makes everything else work. And Judaism, we talk about Judaism being based in three areas: God, Torah, meaning study, and not just Torah like the scripture, but
Right.
Torah as in ever evolving study.
Yes.
Not just even Jewish study, but all study of
This is
the
Torah
way,
too, right? Is what we
learning.
say sometimes, right? Yes.
Exactly.
Uh-huh.
Life lessons and all
Yes.
of that. And then there's Israel, which is
Yes.
not originally thought about as just the people Israel or just the land Israel, but it's a combination, and the people more than anything, right?
Okay.
The only place that Judaism can be lived out in its fullest form as described in the Hebrew Bible is in the land, right?
Yeah.
But Israel is a source of Jewish identity, and one of the legs of the three-legged stool of Judaism that stands in relation to the land. But Israel is more than the land. So
Right.
so God, Torah, and Israel are the three legs, and I think.
Let me interrupt you and ask, how does that relate to the rabbinic redefinition of Israel after the fall of Jerusalem that was sort of prayer, study, and deeds of loving kindness? Is there a relationship? I can see sort of the God and Torah there. Is it the peoplehood? Is it the relationship to others that is named Israel that connects with all of that?
Well, it's all connected. The prayer and acts of kindness are ways to. They're basically repairing
the world. Right.
They're
Right.
ways to atone
Right,
for
right.
things that we've done that
Right.
are not working out so well,
Right.
either for us or for others. So I think it's actually in the Zohar that these three, God, Torah, and Israel, are described
Okay.
as being the three legs, and certainly the persistence of Israel, even in the diaspora, is
Right.
a sign that that God is still with the people,
Right.
even outside of the land.
So Israel is just laden with so many levels of meaning, isn't it?
It is, and that's
Yeah.
a whole other discussion,
Yes,
especially
yes.
in today's, political climate,
Right.
and in today's climate of, the whole conflagration of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism.
Right.
Jews haven't figured it out either.
Right. Oh, that's a relief to hear, because we certainly haven't as
Yeah,
Christians. Yes.
Yeah. So.
Okay, good.
And I remember actually when we were in Israel together,
Yes.
you were talking about all of us,
Yes.
Baptists and Jews together,
Right.
being part of Israel, and the call
Right.
to,
Yes.
to the greater Israel.
Right. So this is something that I think many people don't understand about the Christian faith, because when you're in a dominant religious culture, the tendency is to think that you have replaced or succeeded all that came before you. And every time Christians have done that in the history of our faith, seeking to somehow claim supremacy or to have succeeded Judaism, we have lost touch with our real identity, which always goes through Jesus, who was a Jew, never actually was a Christian. Jesus never became a Christian. And the rootedness of the Jewishness from which we come, even Paul, who gets criticized for having changed the faith into Christianity almost single-handedly, still talks about how we are like a wild olive shoot that has been grafted in to the root of Judaism. So there's a sense in which our proper sense of identity as the church must remain moored to our sister, well, maybe it's our mother religion, and we should honor our mother, which is Judaism, which I think part of that is what we've learned to do together, isn't it? Yeah.
For sure, and to appreciate. I mean, I really do think, and going back to that question of, where was my call? Where did my
Yes.
calling come from? I mean,
Right.
I see now that, so I was really drawn to the people.
Yes.
I spent time in
Okay.
Israel. I was an exchange student in my junior year of high school.
Okay.
So I hadn't been anywhere.
Right.
I was 16 years old. I'd never traveled anywhere, and I got plucked up and put in this country that in 1976 didn't look anything like it looks today.
Isn't that the truth? Yes.
It was not looking like the Western
Right.
Mecca that it does today
Right.
in any way. And I had an experience of 6 months in that place and felt so connected to not just the land, which I did feel very connected to the land, but to the people who were very different than I was from. I lived with a family who originally was from Kurdistan. They ate things that were totally alien to me.
Right.
The way of life was so different. Everything about it was so different, and yet this was my people. And, so that I think was the origin of my connection.
Right.
And from there, I think it grew into that idea of Torah, that I really thought that the teachings of the Jewish people were insightful and meaningful, and
Right.
gave me personal grounding in an identity that I could live a purposeful life from.
Right.
And then it's only actually been later in my life, and long after I was ordained as a rabbi, that I started really exploring the more spiritual aspects of the faith.
Yeah. Which I think almost any Christian minister would say worked in theory in the opposite direction, right? That we had first this experience with God in some sense that then led us to study and then to serving the people, you might say. But maybe if we were really honest about it, the way we came to all of those experiences was not that different. We experienced God somehow in the mystery of human relationships, of communities, of meaning, and that it drove us then to try to interpret and understand that, and then answer what call came to us. We maybe understood that we were being called because we were part of those communities.
Do you think that's true for you?
I think it might be. I think it's, you see, this is why these conversations are important, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, really, this is part of what we're discovering, isn't it? That if we break out of our echo chambers and realize that God is at work in other people's lives in ways that become for us a mirror, that we interpret our own experiences by these relationships.
Yeah, and I think, I'm thinking back to our previous conversation, and I think one of the things that's challenging about being married to another rabbi is that people, or even being a member of any clergy in the Western world, people ascribe this sense of connection to God and calling by God to us, even if that's not the source of our sense of calling. Right.
Yeah, there is a desire for there to be, in our experience, something unique from everybody else's experience, isn't there? I mean, a religious leader has to have a unique vocational story, right? But it may be that we're robbing lay people, you might say, of the meaningfulness of their own spiritual experience by segregating ourselves over here and pretending that we have this unique role. And maybe it would be more helpful to everyone, the peoplehood of God, if we saw our ministry in the world as being a vocation, whatever it is.
Well, I think I do. I do think that. And if you think about it, think about the doctors who you've loved, or the lawyers who have helped you, or the teacher, or, I mean, those are callings, right? They really are. And
Barbara Brown Taylor is one of America's great preachers that I'm sure you know, and she wrote a book called An Altar in the World, in which she made this case, that our altars for all of our vocations are in the world, and they may be a desk for a teacher, or they may be a place at the bar for a lawyer or a judge, or they may be a pulpit, or it may be a kitchen sink. Whatever the case may be, there's an altar for everyone to do their ministry on. So it's a beautiful thought. Well, you mentioned Israel, and we have been to Israel together, and that's been really a lot of fun, and we are actually planning to do that again this fall.
I know.
So, yeah, we're close to getting it all finalized. We've been working hard on that. So I suppose we could say to some people, if there's room for you, give us a call, and we'll see if there's a spot for the trip. But that's going to be a beautiful experience. I have the feeling that it's just not as useful to me to do a trip to the Holy Land that is just a Christian trip. The land doesn't belong to any one person or any one religious group. It's such a remarkably diverse place, and we learn so much more about our faith when we are with people who share that land.
Well, and I think that it is really dangerous anywhere to enter into an experience with our own narrative and to look for the signs of that narrative being reinforced, right? Without opening our eyes up to the other narratives that did and are and will play themselves out in that same experience or that same place. So all the more so in Israel, where there are so many competing narratives from the past and now in the present. And if we're going to ever get to some different kind of future for that part of the world, we're going to have to start seeing each other's narratives. And so, I really love Israel, and I feel very committed to showing that love through experiences that really try to help people see different narratives.
Well, and I love doing it with you, and we'll look forward to that together. Thank you for sharing something of your spiritual journey with us and your ministry. Love the conversation. Good God, we're underway.
Thank you,
Glad to have you
George.
as a guest. Bless you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, good.